Hi there! Today I'm here to bring you a complete Vue.js tutorial using the Composition API and Pinia. So if you're looking to move from the Options API to the Composition API and from state management with Vuex to Pinia, this is going to be a valuable lesson to you. We're going to complete a project together while we go through the most important topics on these two subjects. One important note is that this is not a beginner Vue.js tutorial. I'm assuming you already have some experience with Vue. If that's not the case, you can check first the video that I'm leaving at the top left corner of the screen. That's my complete Vue.js tutorial for beginners, and I suggest you watch it first. If you already know Vue.js, you are ready to get started. So let's go, let me show you the project that we are going to be working on today. This is a simple to-do app that I'm calling a tasks manager. So here we have a few tasks with a title and description. We can toggle between the done and the to-do states. We can filter tasks by state and also clear the filters, and we can add new tasks. So let me test one. We add the task and we can see it right here. So a super simple project that will allow us to learn all the basics of Vue.js using the Composition API. To get started, download the initial version of the project that I left in the description of this video. Then you can open the project folder inside Visual Studio Code. Now let's open a new terminal so we can install all dependencies. For that, let's type npm install or npm I. Now we can type vite to run the project in the local host. If you have any problems using vite or installing the project, you can leave a comment and I will help you out. Now let's copy the address for the local host and paste it in the web browser. So this is the initial version. If you click things, nothing will work because we're going to build functionality from beginning. What we have here is just HTML and CSS that I prepared so we can save some time. Now let's split the screen so we can see both the code and the browser window. And on Visual Studio Code, let's get started in the app.vue component. One thing you probably notice here is that we are starting with a script setup. And with the Options API, we just had a simple script tag. So let's go to the documentation. We have two ways of working with the Composition API. Either we start a setup function and then we write all the logic, all the variables and functions. A simpler way to work with the Composition API is using a script setup tag, and then everything we create inside here, all the variables, functions, will be exposed to the template. So let's go back there and let's do some tests. As you can see, we already have a variable for the tasks. We are going to use it a bit later. Let's first create one for the title of the page. So we can create a variable. Let's call it app name. Let's type something different just so we see if this is working. So for example, my new task manager. Once we create a variable inside the script setup, it is automatically available to be used in the template. So here, instead of hard coding the title, we can use the value of that variable. If we do that and save, we can see the new title showing on the page. One thing to pay attention is that even though the variable is already available to be used in the template, it is not reactive by default. So to see what I'm speaking about, let's add an input field right down here. And let's say we want the user to have the ability to change the title from this input. So we know with Vue.js, we can simply do this by adding the vModal directive to an input field. And we are going to bind this value to that variable. We save this, we can see the new input field showing here, and it already has the value of the variable. And this happens because of the vModal directive. But if we start changing the value inside here, we can see that the change is not reflected on the page. And why is that? This is because if we want variables to be reactive, we are going to need to opt in to the reactivity system. So let's go to the documentation and let's click on Reactivity Fundamentals. Make sure to have the preference set to the Composition API. As you can see, if we want a variable to be reactive, we need to use ref. So let's copy this. Let's go back there. So at the top of the script tag, we're going to import ref. The semicolon here is optional, but I like using it. And now we can use refs. So we run this function when we create the variable, and between parentheses, we're going to set the initial value of the variable. So this is just like what we had before, but now this is going to be reactive. If we save this and now we change the value of the input, we can see that now this is working just fine. So remember that in the options API, we didn't have to do this. Once we create a data property, it is automatically reactive. This is not how it works in the composition API. So you will see that with the composition API, some of the things will have to be done manually like this. One important thing to note here is that when you create a ref variable, if you want to use it on the template, you can just use the variable name. However, if you want to use it inside the script tag, you need to access its value from a value property. For example, if I add an alert function and I want to output the value of this variable, if I just use app name and save, as you can see, we are not seeing the value. We are seeing an object. This is because ref variables are wrapped inside an object with a property called value. So we need to do app name.value. We save this and now we have access to the value of the variable. And the same thing happens if you want to change its value. So if I want to assign a new value to this variable, I need to do app name.value equals, then I can type new value, and now we are able to change it. So this was just something important I wanted to add. We're going to have more opportunities later to practice this. Now we have this variable that is reactive, and we also want to make the to-dos list reactive, because when we add a new task, then we need to be reflected on the page. But this is not going to be done with the ref. This is because refs are only used for primitives. So I'm going to type here ref for primitives. For example, numbers, strings, booleans, and other primitive values. Now let's see how we can do it with arrays and objects. So here I'm going to type it as a comment. I'm going to type reactive for arrays and objects. If you go to the documentation, you can scroll down until you find reactive. So let's go down, and as you can see, this is another way to declare reactive state. The usage is similar to ref, but there will be one difference that we will see in a moment. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Now let's import reactive. We can do it in the same line, just separating by comma. So ref and reactive. And right here, actually, let me rename this to tasks to be more consistent with the rest of the application. And we are going to make it reactive the same way we did with ref. So we are going to declare it as reactive right here, and we can close parentheses at the end. And this is now a reactive value. Now we can use it to render the tasks in our list. So let's go down here. This is the HTML for each task. And instead of having it hard-coded like this, let me just erase the second one. Now here we can run a loop in this element. So in the template section, there won't be any differences between the options API and the composition API, just in the script section. So here we can just add a v-for loop. We are going to create a variable called task for each of the tasks and also an index. So we can use as a key, and we are going to run through the tasks array. So let's add the key attribute with the index. And now we need to replace the dynamic information. So let's go up there. We have name, description, and completed. So right here, this is going to be the name of the task. So task.name. We can copy this. In the p tag, there will be the description. And we have the checked attribute that will have to be dynamic. So let's add the colon. And inside here, we are going to add task.completed. So if this value is set to true, then we will see this checkbox checked. Let's save this and let's see if this works. And now we are dynamically showing the tasks on the page. Now that we have this, we can go ahead and add the logic so we can add new tasks. So for this, let's add a new variable for the new task. This is going to start as an object with only one property, which is going to be the completed property, which will be set to false by default. And the other properties, name and description, will come from the input fields. So we can also create a function so we can add the task to the list. And what this function is going to do is tasks.push, and we are going to push the new task. Now this is the difference I mentioned between ref and reactive. Remember that when manipulating the value of a ref variable inside the script tag, we need to use .value. With reactive, we don't have to do that. So we don't have to type tasks.value.push. We can access the value directly. Now let's go down to where the input fields are, and we are going to add the vModal directives. So vModal. This is going to be sent to new task.name. And this one is going to be sent to new task.description. Now when we click the button, let's execute the function. So at click, we are going to invoke the add task function. Let's save this and let's see if this is working. Let's add a new task. So new task. This is a new task. We click add task. And as you can see, we were able to add a new task to the list. And the change appears immediately on the page because the tasks variable is reactive. So this is pretty cool. We just need to do some improvements here. And the first one is to clear the input fields when we add the task. So let's go up to the function, and right after pushing the new task, we can assign the value again. So new task is going to go back to an object with just the completed property. Let's save this. And another thing we can do here is add a validation, because now if we add a task without title and description, as you can see, there is no validation. So let's add an if statement inside here. And the condition is going to be that if new task.name and new task.description, if they are blank, JavaScript is going to consider them as false, and we're going to go to the else block. So here we're going to send an alert, and we can send a message like, please enter the title and description for the task. Saving this, let's do a test now. We can try to add a blank one, and it is not letting us. Let's try to add just the title. Let's try again. It is not letting us. And now let's add the description. And now we were able to add a new task, but there seems to be a problem here because we are not seeing the input fields being cleared. And the reason why we are not seeing the change here is because we created the variable as a constant, and constant values are immutable. So here, let's change this to let. With the reactive variables, we don't have to follow that. As you see in the Vue.js documentation, they always use constant. And this is because the way the values are defined to reactive variables under the hood is different. So this is not going to cause any errors. But for our variables, this is going to make a difference. Because of that, even for the reactive variables, if you want to keep consistent and use let for the ones that will change and constant for the ones that won't change, I think it's a good practice. So let's leave it as let, and let's try again. So here, let's add a new task. And now we can see it being added and the input fields have been cleared, which is pretty cool. Now that we've done this, we can already remove this ref from here because in the end, we're not intending to make any changes to the title. So let's also remove the ref from here. We're not going to use it now, but we are going to use it later. I'm going to delete these comments as well. If you want to leave them on your project, that's fine. And we also don't need the input field that we added here. So let's clean this up. And we are now ready to move on to components, props, and scoped styles. Before we get started, let me just correct the title that I forgot to put back. So it was Tasks Manager. And now let's start separating our app into components, because here we have the header, filters, tasks, everything in one place. And we know that this is going to become a mess very, very soon. So let's start doing the right thing, which is separating things into components. The first thing I'm going to separate into a component here are the tasks. So let's go to the components folder and let's create a new file called task.view. To create a component with the composition API, we start with the script setup. And remember that with the options API, I used to have the template first, but with the composition API, what you will see normally is the script coming first. So the logic of the component is the most important part, and then the template, and then the style. So here we are going to add the template and also a style tag, which we're also going to speak about in this video. Now going back to the app.view, let's not forget to import this component. So let's use import task from components / task.view. With the options API, not only we had to import the component, but also list in the components option. With the composition API, we don't have to do that. We only have to import it and it is ready to be used in the template. So let's go down there, and for the loop, instead of running the loop in a div, we're going to run a loop in the task component. So it is going to be right here, and the loop is going to be in this component. Now we can just copy all the HTML code, remove it from here, and let's replace this div with the div with a class of task that we had there. And this is not going to work yet because we need to pass the prop. Let's remember that we were running the loop and then we have the task with all the properties that we need to use inside the component. So let's go to the documentation to see how we use props in the composition API. So let's go to components in depth and props. So this is the first difference between the composition API and the options API. We are not going to list the props as an option, but as a regular variable. It is a good practice to name this variable props because we are going to need it to access this value later, unless we are in the template. In the template, we are not going to need to call props. But let's go to Visual Studio Code so we see that in practice. So inside the task.view, at the top of the script, we're going to define the variable for the props, and we are going to use define props. The name is going to be task. So here we will be able to access the props. If we want to use it in the script, we will need to call it props.task, but in the template is not necessary. We can just call task directly. So now that we have this defined as a prop, we can just go ahead and pass to the child component as a prop. And we know that we can do that by adding a custom attribute with colon and then the name of the prop, which is going to be task. And then what we want to pass is this task that we created in the v4 loop. So we can do this, save it, go back to the page. Let's refresh the page. And now, as you can see, we were able to render all the tasks in a separate component. Now let's go back there and do something, which is separating the styles. So if we go down here, we will see that we have styles for the header, filters, tasks, This is for the individual tasks, and this is for the add task area. So let's get all the styles for the individual tasks. Let's press Ctrl X to cut it from here. And let's go to the task component and paste it inside the style tag. So it is a good practice that you separate all the CSS between components. So here I have all the styles for the task cards, so they should be separated inside here. Now there are some interesting things we can do when we work with the style tags inside components in Vue.js, and the first thing is that we can use SCSS. So if we add the lang attribute and choose SCSS, we can use Sass, and it's going to be much easier to write CSS styles. I'm not going to go into the details of Sass, but if you want to learn more, if you don't know Sass, you can just go to sass-lang.com and you have a nice tutorial of how to use Sass. Now, another thing that we can do with the style tags is declare a scoped attribute. This means that everything we type here will only be valid to this component. If we don't have the scoped attribute, then everything we type here will be global. So let's do a quick test. Let's go to the app component and let's see some common elements that we have. For example, we have an age one here, and we're going to go in this component, and I'm going to add an age one just so we can make a test. So let's do this now. And what I'm going to do is declare the age one selector, and I'm going to define the color to red. I'm going to add the important so we can force it to be applied to the other one as well, even if the selector is less specific. And if we go back to the page, we will see that not only we added the color to the age ones inside this component, but we also changed the one that was inside another component. And this can be a bit dangerous because we don't want to be messing with styles that are not inside this component. And if we have to be specific all the time inside here, we are also going to lose productivity as well. So instead, we can just use the scoped attribute, which means that we don't have to be that specific inside, and all the styles we type are only going to be applied to this component. So now if we go back there, you can see that the age one that is not inside this component did not get that style. All right, so this was just a test. So now that we know a bit more about how to use components, props with the composition API, and also how to use the style tags inside components, we are ready to start working on the function to toggle between the done and to do states. Right now, it seems to be working because we can check and uncheck, but as you can see, we are not seeing any change in the text. So let's adjust this text first. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. And right here, we don't want it to be done. If the task is completed, so let's add a ternary conditional. So if we have the task completed, then we want to show done. If not, we want to show to do. So let's save this. Let's go back there. And now we can see that when we load the page, this is working fine. The ones that are checked are marked as done. The ones that are not are marked as to do. However, when we check and uncheck, we are not seeing any change because we are not modifying the array of tasks. The problem here is that if we go back to the app.vue to where we have the array, we don't have an ID for the tasks. So we are going to have to add IDs for them, and then we need to create a new ID when adding to-dos to the list. So let's do that right now. Let's add some IDs for the ones that already exist. So this one is going to be 1. And let's quickly do this for all of them. So this is 2, 3, and 7. All right, so now that we have an identifier for the tasks, all we have to do is when we add a new task, we need to assign a new ID as well. And this is going to be similar of what we've done in the books application. So before pushing the new task, we're going to assign a new ID. So new task dot ID is going to receive the next available ID. We'll get the tasks array, and we're going to apply the map function so we can create an array with only the IDs. So we are going to get each of the tasks, and we are going to bring only the ID. With this, we are going to have an array with only the IDs. Now we are going to apply the math.max function so we know what is the highest ID, but the problem is that the max function does not accept arrays. And to remove the elements from the array and bring only the list, we use the spread operator. And now that we know what is the biggest ID, we just add 1, and this is going to be the next available ID. And then we can push the new task to the list. Now to see if this is working, let's go to the task component, and I'm going to add here the ID of them just so we can test if this is working. So I'm going to add task.id. Let's save this. Let's go back there. So as you can see, we have the IDs of the tasks. Let's add a new one. So new task. And when we add it, we just added one with the ID of 8. Let's try another one. And we added one with the ID of 9. So now we were able to create unique IDs. So let's go back there, and we can now remove this ID from here. Now what we need to do here is relatively simple. Every time we click this input, we want to change the value of the completed property. So we can add an @click, and then we could just create a function called toggle completed. But the problem here is that the tasks array is not inside this component, so we can't make this change from here. We are going to have to emit an event to the parent component. So let's go to the documentation. Under components in depth, let's go to events, and let's remember that we can create custom events by using emit. So let's copy this. And when we have a click on the input, we're going to emit an event, and we can call the event anything we want as long as it is meaningful. So in this case, let's use toggle completed. And we also need to pass an argument. And let's remember that to pass an argument, we're going to separate it with comma. And what we're going to pass is the ID of the task. So let's pass the ID. And then when we create the component, we need to listen to this event. So in the parent component, let's add a listener to this custom event we just created, which is called toggle completed. And when this event occurs, we are going to call a function with the same name. So let's use toggle completed as well. And we can create a new function to handle this. For this, we're going to need the ID of the task. And to see if this is working, let's start with a console.log. Let's type clicked. And then let's show the ID of the task we are clicking on. Let's save this. Let's go back to the page. Let me open the inspector. Go to the console. Let's refresh the page. And now if we click on this, we can see we clicked 1, 2, 3, 7. So we can see that the event part is working. Now, all we have to do is modify the tasks array to reflect this change. So let's do this now. We can now run a loop through the tasks array. So tasks dot for each. For every element we find in this array, let's call it task. And while we are running the loop, if the task.id is the same as the ID we are passing through the event, we are just going to toggle the completed property. So we are going to do task.completed is going to be the opposite of the current value. Let's save this. Let's see if this is now working. So when we go back there, let me just refresh the page. So when we click the input, we can see that now this is being updated. So we are now able to toggle the completed state for each task. Now let's work on the functionality to filter tasks by state. So the first thing we're going to do is to add the filter as a separate component, because we don't want to be mixing logic from different components. So let's go to the filters section, which is this one. We are going to cut all this HTML from here, and we are going to add a new component called filter. Now let's create this component. And let's remember that we need a script setup tag. And also a template. This div can be replaced by that div with a class of filters. And now we just need to bring the style. So let's go to the style tag. Here are all the styles for the filters. We can cut it from here. And we can add a style tag with the scoped attribute and also the SCSS_lang attribute. And we can paste all the styles inside. Now let's import the component. So here we can copy and paste this line, and we are going to import the filter from components/filter. Let's save this. Let's go back there and we can see that everything is still working fine. So let's start working on the functionality. Now let me minimize the tasks variable and also the function so we can see things better here. Remember that with the composition API, we are free to write our JavaScript code the way we want, but this is also a bit dangerous because it's very easy for everything to become a mess. So let's be very organized when writing our JavaScript code. So as you can see, we have our variables, then our functions. So let's keep using this pattern. The first thing I'm going to do here is start a new variable, and I'm going to name it filter by. This one will have to be reactive because we are going to be changing the value of this variable, and we will need to see changes being reflected on the page when we change the filters. So this is going to be a ref variable. So let's import a ref now. We already know how to use it because it's just going to be a string. So let's add the ref function so we can create a ref variable, and the initial value for this variable is going to be an empty string. Now we need to pass this value as a prop to the filter so we can use inside that component. So here in the filter component, we can create a new prop. So let's use colon filter by, and the value we are going to pass is the value of the filter by variable. Now what we need to do is define a prop inside here. We can go to the test component and copy this line of code just to save time, and we can create a prop called filter by. Now we're going to have to adjust the CSS for the badges. The badges were not in the app component. If you go to the main.css, you will find the CSS for the badges. So let's copy all this or cut with Ctrl X. And instead of having it in the main.css, let's bring to the filter component. This is going to be inside badges. So we can just paste it inside like this. And this one, as I've mentioned with SCSS, we don't have to close the badge selector and then open another one with .badge.selected. We can have this nested inside instead. And here we can add the end symbol. So this is going to be .badge.selected. And right here, we can close the badge selector. So let's save this to see if this is still working. So as you can see, this is working normally. So now what I want to do is the following. I want to add this selected class whenever we have this filter selected. So let's go up there, and when we have the badge, let's add a conditional class right here. So let's add an object, and let's remember that to add a conditional class, first we add the class that we want. In this case is the selected class, and then the condition is going to be if the filter by prop is set to do. Now we are going to do the same thing for the done, but in this case we need to see it as done. And now let's do a test. Let's go to the app and let's start this variable as done, for example. Let's save this. Let's go back to the page. And as you can see now, we were able to select the done filter. Let's test the to do as well. So to do, we save this, and now we are selecting the to do filter. Now for the clear button, we should only see it if we have any value in the filter by prop. So let's go to the filter component, and we only want to see this span. So if we have any value in the filter by. So filter by, if we have an empty string, we are not going to see this element. So let's save this, go back there. Right now we have one selected, so we are seeing the clear button, but if we don't have anything, so let's go back to an empty string. We go back there, now we don't see the clear button anymore. So far, so good. Now we need to be able to click on these filters and change the value of that variable. So going back to Visual Studio Code, let's create a function so we can set the filter. So let's call this function set filter. We're going to have a value that we want to set for the filter. And what we're going to do is change the value of this variable. So filter by is going to be equal to the value. Let's remember that we are working with a ref right here, so don't forget to add the dot value. So this way, we're going to alter the value of this variable. Now we need to emit an event when we click those buttons. So let's go to the task component so we can copy this part of the code. Let's go to the filter component, and when we click this to do badge, we are going to emit an event, and the event is going to be the set filter, and the value we want to send is to do. Now we are going to do the same thing for the done badge, but in this case we're going to emit the event and we are going to send the value of done. Now what we need to do is listen to the event in the parent component. So let's go to the app component, and right here in the filter we are going to listen to an event called set filter, and when it happens we are going to call the set filter function. We save this, we go back to the page, let's try to do it. We click the button, we were able to select it, and now we see the clear button. We click done, we are able to change, and now we need to work on the clear button. So let's go back there, and now we can use the same function, we just have to pass an empty string. So going to the filter component, we can just copy this, and when we click the clear filter button, we can just emit the set filter and we can send an empty string, and this is going to clear the filter. We save this, we go back to the page, we can toggle between the filters, and when we click clear, we are going to clear the filters. So this is super cool. Now the only thing we need to do is actually filter the tasks that appear on the list, and for that we are going to need computer properties. Every time we want to calculate something based on the value of reactive variables, we use computed properties. So let's go to the documentation. Let's go to computed properties. Let's scroll down, and as you can see, to use computed properties, we need to import it first, and then we can create a variable by using the computed function. So let's copy this, and let's go back to Visual Studio Code. So at the top of the app.view, we are going to import computed. We can now minimize the setFilter function, and after the variables, we are going to include our computed properties. So let's paste it right here, and we are going to create a computed property called filtered tasks. Now this is going to depend on two reactive variables, the tasks and the filter by. Whenever they change, the computed property is going to be recalculated. So inside here, I think the cleanest way to compute this property is by using a JavaScript switch statement. Here we are going to add an expression, and inside curly braces, we are going to add the cases. So the expression is going to be the filter by value. Let's remember that we need to use the value attribute. So this is going to be filter by dot value. Now to the cases, if the value of this variable is set to do, then we are going to return only the tasks that are not completed. So we are going to return the tasks array, but we are going to filter by the completed property. So let's add the arrow function, and we only want the tasks that don't have the completed property set to true. In this case, we are going to use the exclamation mark. So if completed is set to false, it is going to be included in this array. Now we can add a break, so we don't have to keep evaluating the rest of the cases. If we go inside here, and now we are going to add another case, which is the done case. Now this is going to be the opposite. What we want here is get the tasks that are completed. And if we have a different value, which is going to include an empty string, then we can just return the tasks array as it is. So we can return tasks. Now we can get this computed property, and instead of looping through the tasks array, we are going to loop through the filtered tasks. And hopefully everything will work perfectly. So let's save this. Let's go back there. And right now we don't have any filter sets. Let me just refresh the page to make sure. So we have 3 tasks that are done. Let's try to filter for done. And as you can see, we now only see the done tasks. Now let's try to filter to do. We only see the tasks that are to be done. We can clear the filter, and let's also do another test. Let me filter for the to do, and I'm going to select this one as done. And now it's not showing on the list anymore. If we go to done, now we see this task right here. So the filter is working perfectly. Now I think it's a good idea that we remove this add task form from the main page. Let's add it to a separate component and make it open as a modal. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and inside the components folder, let's create a new file called modal window.view. Let's add the script tag, also the template tag, and a style tag. Now you can copy the code that I left in the description of this video for the modal window. So there we have the HTML code and also the CSS. So let's save this, and now we need to place this inside the app component. So let's import this component first. Let me copy this and change the name of the component to modal window. And here let's adjust the path as well. So this is going to be a reusable component for the modals of our application. So here we are going to include the modal window component. Now let's save this and let's see how this looks. And as you can see, this is a nice pop-up that when open, we have this overlay that leaves the back screen a bit darker and we can concentrate on the pop-up. I think the form inside here is going to look really nice. Before we add the form here, let's just do some adjustments. So one adjustment that I think we should do here is about this close button. This is because there's too much code here. There's this SVG code, which is super long. So I prefer to have a separate component for this. So let's create another one called Modal Close Button. In this one, we can just have the template. So let's get the code for the button only and let's place it inside here. Now we can import the Modal Close Button. Let's just remove the components folder because we are already inside it. So Modal Close Button. And we can add it right here. Let's see if this is working. Going back there, we can see the close button right here. So this is looking way cleaner. Now we need to create the functionality to open and close the modal. So let's go to the app.view. Let's create a ref variable. And let's name it Modal is active. Let's set its initial value to true to get started with, so we can see the modal. And then we are only going to have this modal window. If that variable is set to true. Now let's go back there. We can see that the modal is still visible. And now let's create the functionality to open and close it. So inside the header element, we have this div with a class of header side. Let's just duplicate this element here. But instead of having an age one, we can add a button with a class of btn. We can also include the secondary class, which is one I created with a special color. And the text for the button is going to be a plus sign and add task. Let's see if this is looking good. Let's go back there and here we can see the button. So what we are going to do here is when we click the button, we are going to turn this variable into true. So modal is active, it's going to turn true. And now we can start with a false value. Let's go back there to see, so we don't see the pop-up anymore. When we click the button, then we can see the pop-up appearing. Now we need to work on the functionality to close the pop-up. So let's do that now. So let's just copy this and we are gonna have to create this as a custom event. So the name of the event is going to be close pop-up. And what we are going to do is the opposite. We are going to set this to false. So now we can copy the name of the custom event. And inside the modal window, when we click the button, we are going to emit an event that has the name of close pop-up. Let's save this. Let's go back there. And now we can open and close the pop-up. Now the basic functionality is done, so we can start customizing it for our form. Now the problem is that if we go to the app.view and then copy the form that we have here and paste inside the modal window, we are not going to be able to reuse this component later. And the idea of having a component for the modal is so that we can reuse later for all the pop-ups we have on our website. So for this, we are going to need to make this content dynamic. Now there is a nice way, which is using slots. So if you go to the documentation under components in depth, just click on slots. And as you can see, we can create slots inside the components. And when we create the component, we can write HTML inside. And this HTML is going to be transferred to the slot element. So let's do a quick test. Right here, instead of having this element for the form, we are going to add a slot. And then let's remove this code from here. And when we create this element, so here it is, instead of closing it in the start tag, we are going to close just like other HTML elements. And the content of this element is going to be our HTML. So everything we type inside here is going to be transferred to that slot. So if we go back to the page now, you will see that that text is still showing here. And this is super nice because now we can just get our form and we can place it inside here. So let's save this and let's see how this looks. And as you can see, now we have a nice form inside the pop-up. And by doing this, we can use this component as many times as we want, and we can always have different content inside them. Now let's just make an adjustment here. I'm going to add a label for the form fields. This is going to look better. So this is for the title. And let's create another one for the description as well. Saving this, going back there, now this is looking nicer. So we have a nice pop-up to add new tasks. Now we can remove this from here. Actually, we don't need the add task area anymore. And this is not looking very clean. So I think we should have another component for this specific modal. But now this is going to be the third component related to modals. So it is a good idea to separate them into a folder. So let's create inside the components folder, let's create one folder for modal. And we are going to place both these components inside this folder. Let's move them there. Now here, let's just include the folder. So components/modal. Let's see if this is still working. Everything's still working fine. And now inside this folder, let's create a new component. Let's call this add task modal. So we need a script tag. And a template tag for now. Now going back to the app.view, let's import this component. So this is the add task modal. And inside here, instead of having all this code, we are going to bring this component and we can have all this code inside the add task modal. So right here, let's place all that code. Now let me just adjust the indentation and remove the extra spaces. We can also remove the V models for now because we're going to have to bring in the functionality inside the component. So this is not going to work for now. Let's remove to avoid errors. Let's save this. And if we go back there, we can see that everything is working fine. We have a nice pop-up. And now everything is nice and clean in the app.view. And we have this new modal component that we can reuse later. For example, if we have a different modal, let me just remove this so we can see this example. If we have a different modal, Going back there, we can reuse the design and have as many pop-ups as we want in our application. So let me remove this one from here. And if you go to the model window, to the style, remember that we didn't use the scope here. This is why everything we placed inside the add task model for the form is getting the styles that we have here. So in this case, it is important that we don't have the scoped, otherwise the form from the child components is not going to get the styles from here. All right, so now we are ready to start working on the functionality. But the problem with this is the following. With the changes we've done, we now need a proper state management system. So let's speak about state. State can be defined as the source of truth of the application. When we started the application, we had two variables in the state, the tasks and the filter by. They were living inside the app component, and we were passing them to the child components using props. The child components then could mutate these variables. For example, we could change the filter, and to do that, we would send an event to the parent component called setFilter, and then the transformation would occur inside the app. And the same thing for the task. If we click the button to mark a task as done or to do, we would emit an event called toggle completed, passing the task ID to the parent component, and the transformation would occur here. At this point, it was completely fine to do that. We just had one root component and two child components. But as our application starts growing, the complexity is going to increase very quickly. For example, if we added one extra component for the tasks, and then we would have each individual task inside that component, whenever we wanted to toggle the completed state, we would have to emit an event to the parent component, and from the parent component, we would have to emit another event to the app. And then if we add the pop-ups to the equation, it starts to get almost unmanageable. So if we want to continue adding new features to our application, we're going to need a state management system. And this is how it would work. All the state variables or the reactive variables would live inside a store. And this is the single source of truth of the application. Then the store would feed all the components that need those variables. For example, we would have the list of tasks here, and the tasks would be fed straight to the tasks component without having to pass through the app component. Same thing for the filter. We would have the filter by state inside the store, and this would be passed directly to the filter component. And to mutate these variables, it would be just as simple. Inside the task component, we could click the button to mark a task as done, and we would send this change straight from the task component to the store without the need of passing through the parent component. So this is how we should build large applications with Vue.js. And the system we are going to use is called Pinia. You can go to pinia.vuejs.org to access the documentation. This is the official state management system suggested by Vue.js. If you go to the Vue.js documentation and you scroll down to scaling up, then state management, you can scroll down and you will see that before Pinia, we had Vuex as the official state management system for Vue, but nowadays it is recommended to use Pinia. So this is what we're going to learn in this section. So I'm here at pinia.vuejs.org, and we can go to guide and then getting started. So to add Pinia to our project, we need to install it first. And we can do this with npm install Pinia. I'm going to copy this, go back to Visual Studio Code, and let me open a terminal and run the command from here. Now, if you go to the package.json file, you will see that now Pinia has been added as a dependency of the project, meaning that it is going to be included in the project when we are ready to publish our application. Now, there are some adjustments that we need to do in the main.js file. So let's go back to the documentation to check. So we need to import create Pinia. We need to create a variable that will execute that function. And we need to use Pinia before mounting the application. Now the next thing we want to do is inside the source folder, create a new folder for our stores. And I'm using plural because we can create multiple stores. Actually, it is recommended that you separate your stores if your application has different subjects. This is going to be clear a bit later. So let's go back to the documentation and let's see how we can define a store. So we are going to need a new JavaScript file, and this is how we are going to get started. Let's copy all this. Let's go back there, and inside the stores folder, we can create a new JavaScript file, and we can call it tasks store.js. So like I said, this is one subject. Everything related to the tasks will be inside the store, and we can have different stores for filters, for pop-ups. So this is a good practice when working with Pinia. So let's paste it here. And here there's a message about good practices when naming stores. As you can see, it is common to use the word use first and then the name of the store. You don't have to do this if you don't want, but it is always good to follow these conventions. So in this case, we are going to call this use tasks store, and the ID of this store is going to be tasks. Now we can erase all this, and this is where we are going to define our reactive variables, computed properties, and methods. Now going back to the documentation, you will see that you have basically two different styles for creating your store. The first one is the option store, and this looks like the options API. So here we would have the state, which are the reactive variables. We would have getters, which are computed properties, and we would have actions, which are methods that mutate the state. If you want to use the option store, it's completely fine, but in order to keep the consistency, I think it is better to use the setup store, because this looks much more like the composition API, which is the style we are using for all our components. So as you can see, we need an arrow function here, and we are going to type all the variables, methods, and computed properties inside. So let's copy all the arrow function, and here we are going to replace, we don't need the curly braces here, and we don't need it at the end either. So we are going to replace all this by that arrow function. So inside here, we are going to have a style just like the composition API for our store. Now, one important thing is that unlike with other components where we can use the script setup and we don't have to return anything, in the store, we always need to return everything that we want to be exposed from the outside. So all the state variables, methods, computed properties, everything will have to be included inside the return statement. So in this case, let's just erase all this, and the first state variable we are going to create here will be the one for the tasks. So we can go to the app.view. Let's go up and let's copy the variable for the tasks, and let's paste it inside here. Now let's not forget to import reactive from view. So reactive from view. And as I've mentioned, we need to return all the state variables, methods, and computed properties that we want to expose to our components. So in this case, we need to return the tasks. Now let's see how we can access these variables from our components. So going back to the documentation, let's go to state. And this is how we access the state. We need to create a constant for the store so we can have access to everything we return from there. So let's copy this. And inside the app.view, right at the start, we are going to create a new variable for the store. And let's not forget to import the store. So we need to import that function we just created, which is called useTasksStore. This is inside the stores folder and inside the tasks store.js file. Now here, instead of use store, this is going to be the store we just created. So this is going to be use tasks store. Now let me close the terminal real quick. And now that we have the store here, all we need to do is bring the tasks value from the store wherever we are using. So for example, right here, we are using the tasks variable, which doesn't exist here anymore, but we can just add store.tasks and we are going to have access to that array. So let's do this in all the instances of the tasks that we used throughout the code. So we use it here as well. Visual Studio Code is helping us with these three little dots below the name of the variable. So we also have it right here. And that's all for the JavaScript code. Now down here, we are not using it because we are getting from the filtered tasks. So saving this, let's go back there. It seems there's an error. Let's see what is going on. Let's go to the console. It says the requested module does not provide an export named default. So this is because since we don't have an export default in the store, this is a named export, so we need curly braces. Let's save and see if it fixes the error. So now everything seems to be working fine. Let's see if the functionality is still working. It seems that it is. Let's see the filters. Filters are working fine. So that's pretty cool. We just created our first store for the tasks, and we need to transfer everything that is related to the tasks functionalities. This is going to be some manual work, but it is a good exercise to go through the code and do this. We just have to pay attention and everything should work correctly. In future projects, you won't have to do this because now that you know Pinia, you can start your store right when you start your application. It actually makes sense to think about the state of your application before you start writing code for it. So here, let's see what is related to the tasks functionality so we can transfer to the store. We can see here that we have this variable called new task. This is not related to the state. This is a local variable, and this is not going to be here. This is going to be in the add task model. So this is not part of the store. The filter by is part of the store. This is a state variable. We can see that this is reactive, and if we had a bigger application with multiple filters, it would make sense to have a filter store. But in this case, we only have one filter, and what it does is change the tasks. So it is no problem to have this variable inside the tasks store. So let's transfer this to the store. Let's remember that we need to return all these things so they can be used. So here we are going to export filter by. And before we move on to the rest of computed properties and functions, let's see where we use the filter by. So let's go down to the code. We can see we had this function called setFilter. This is also going to be part of the store. So let's transfer this to the store and export this function. So right here, we can see that we are passing the filter by as a prop. We are not going to need to do that anymore. And we also don't need this set filter event. We can do both of these things from inside the component because now we have everything centralized in the store. So let's work on this first. Let's go to the filter. And here, instead of getting it as a prop, we can get it directly from the store. Let's remember how we use the store. First, we need to import the use tasks store. Now, one quick tip if you want to switch between files quickly. Let's say I wanted to have the tab on the left close. I could just use Control or Command P to find and then I can type app, press enter, Control P again, filter, press enter. So this is a nice way of quickly switching between files. So I just wanted to show you this. So right here, we need to create the store when we start the component. And now we can delete this prop. In all the places we had filter by, we can just use store.filter by. So we have it here. Here as well. And down here inside the vif. And now we also need to adjust the set filter. Let's remember that we just transfer this to the store. So right here, instead of emitting an event like this, we can just call store dot set filter. And we are going to pass the value we want to set to the filter. So in this case, it's to do. Let's copy all this. For this, the value is going to be done. And the same thing to clear the filter. This time we send an empty string. So now this should be working fine. Let's save this. Let's go back there and see if everything's working. Now the problem with the filter is the folder. We are inside components. So instead of using the dot here, it's better to use @ because then we are going to go to the root folder. In this case, it's the source folder. And we don't have to do this, for example, to go out of the components folder and then into the stores folder. We can just go to the root folder, which is the source folder, and then stores, tasks, store. So saving this, and before we go ahead, let's just check something. If we go to the app.view, let's remember that we also have this computed property that depends on the filter by value. So let's take this to the store as well. So we remove this from here. And down here where we use the filter tasks, we are going to get it straight from the store. And now we can place it inside the store. So let's put it inside here. Let's not forget to return this new computed property. And since this is the first time we are using a computed property, let's also import it from view. And now one last thing I just realized, we can clean this up a bit because we don't need the break statements inside here. Normally we use break statements when we have different expressions, so we can stop evaluating the rest of the cases. But when we have a return statement, JavaScript is going to stop right here because a function can only have one return statement. So in this case, the break statement is not necessary. So we can remove this from here, save it, and if we go back there, now everything seems to be working fine. We can toggle the states of the tasks. Let's try using the filters. So now we see only the to-do tasks, only the done tasks, and we can also clear the filter. So this part is done. So like I said, a bit of a manual work, but it's a good exercise to go through the code and do this. We have to pay attention so we don't leave anything behind. Now we are almost there. Let's just take the toggle completed and the add task functions as well. And as you can see, we're starting to clean up our app component. So let's go to the task store and let's bring these functions here. So we need to return the add task and also the toggle completed. Now, just one thing we need to adjust. We don't need the store right here because we are already inside the store. Now let's see where we were using those functions. So starting with the add task, we are actually not using this yet because we just transferred that form from the app component to our pop-up. So in the next video, we can start working on this functionality. So let's check the toggle completed. As you can see, we had this event in the task component. We don't need to have this here anymore. We can do it straight from the child component. So saving this, let's go to the task component. So Control P, task. Inside here, we don't have to emit toggle completed. We just need to bring the state to this component. So let me just move it to the beginning of the list here. And let's see how we did it for the filter. So we can just copy and reuse it here. So we are going to import the task store. And here's one example of a prop that we will maintain. It doesn't make sense to go to the store to get an individual task. So for the task, it is fine to keep it as a prop. And now that we have the store, we can just, instead of emitting an event, we can call straight from here. So store.toggle completed, and we are going to pass the task ID. Now let's save this. Let's go back there. Let's make some tests. So we can toggle the completed state, no problem. Let's see if the filters are working. So we can filter by to do, by done. We can clear the filter. So everything seems to be working fine now. We are ready to start working on the add task functionality. So let's go to Visual Studio Code so we can do what's needed. First, remember that in the app.view component, we had this variable called new task, and we were using it to do the v model for the form fields. So let's get this variable and let's transfer it to the add task model. Now let's put back the v models. For this input, let's use v model. And then we are going to use new task. Just be careful here because even though the name of the field is title, the property in the tasks array is called name. So all the tasks have a name, not a title. And for the text area, this is going to be the description. And now when we click the button, we can call the method straight from the store. And for that, we need to import the store. So let's go to another component that has it. This one, for example, we can copy these two lines of code so we can import the store. And we are going to call this method directly from the store. And now we are going to need to pass the new task as an argument. Because if we had the method right here, we could access the variable directly. But now that the method is outside of here, we need to send the new task. So let's go to the task store to adjust this. This is the add task method, and now we are going to send the new task as an argument. So inside here, we will be able to use it. We don't need to clean this anymore because when we close the pop-up, we're going to destroy the component and this is going to be cleared anyway. But we can test this a bit later. And here we are already inside the store, so we can remove this and now just this store as well. And now this should be working fine. Let's save this. Let's go back there. Let's add a new task. Actually, let me just refresh the page just in case. Let's try to add a new task. So I'm going to do AAA just to test, add a task, and we can see that the task is being added correctly. We are not clearing the fields and we are not closing the pop-up, so we need to work on this now. But the basic functionality of adding the task is working fine. Now let's go back there, and the problem with doing this is that inside the app.view is where we are controlling if the modal is active. And we are going to have to transfer this to the store. Normally, if this was a real-life application, I would create a new store just for the pop-ups. So it would be something like modal store. In this case, I'm not going to do that because we don't have other models. We only have one model and it serves only to add new tasks. So for this example, we can consider that it's part of the tasks functionality. So I think it's important to clarify this because the modal functionality is not exactly related to the tasks, but in this case, it's fine. So we can define this at the top here. This is going to be a reactive value. So modal is active. Now let's go to the app And one interesting thing is that we don't have any reactive variables or computed properties here anymore, which is a good thing. It means that we just transferred everything to the store. Now down here, we need to adjust this, so we could mutate this variable straight from here. We could just add store.modal is active equal true, but there is a little problem here. If we go back there, let's remember that this is a ref variable. So we need to access it by its value property. And because of this, I think it is better to have two actions here so we can open and close the model. Then we won't forget to use the dot value. I think it is safer to do this. So let's add two functions. So one function is going to be called open model. And this is going to do modal is active dot value is going to be true. And then another function to close the model. And we are going to set it to false. So this is safer because we won't forget to use the dot value. If we change it from out of the store, then we might forget and have unexpected problems. Now let's not forget to include these two functions in the return. And also that variable. So let's go up, let's copy the modal is active so we can include here as well. Now let's do the adjustments in the app component. So here, instead of setting it directly, we are going to call store.openModel. And down here, we need to include the store. Store.modal is active. We don't need to listen to this event anymore. Now the only thing missing is going to the modal window component and doing the changes here. So here, instead of emitting this event to close the pop-up, we are just going to call the close modal method. And let's not forget to import the store. So let's see if everything is working. I'm going to refresh the page. If we click here, we can open the modal. We can close the modal. Now let's try adding a new task. We can add the new task, and now we just need to finish this. As I've mentioned, when we add the new task, we can then close the modal. So let's go back to the store. And right here, we have the function to add the task. And right after pushing the new task, we can call the close modal function. We save this. We go back there. Let's add a new task. We click here. We added a new task and we close that pop-up. We see it on the list, but when we refresh the page, it is gone. Because the application is reloaded, then it loads this static list of tasks that we have as an array, and it is not keeping the tasks that we enter. Of course, to make this work properly, we would need a database. But even without the database, if we just want to have a little fun and use this app in our computer in the same browser, we can do it by keeping the tasks in the local storage. So let's do that now. Let's go to Visual Studio Code, and we need two things. First, when the application loads, we need to check in the local storage to see if we have tasks, and if we do, we want to load them. And then the second thing we need to do is every time we add a new task, we want to update the local storage. Let's start by step number 2 because we are going to start the application without any to-dos. So instead of having the tasks like this, I'm just going to leave an empty array. So I'm going to comment all this. And now if we go back there and refresh the page. Now we don't have any tasks. Now let's do a quick test just to see if we can add a new one. So as you can see, we can start our own tasks, which is good. So let's go back there. Now, every time we add a new task, we want to send the tasks object to the local storage so we can load it the next time we load the application. So we could add this piece of code right here. Right after adding the new task, we could write a line of code to set the local storage. The problem is that we don't need to do this only here. When we update the tasks, we need to update the local storage as well. So when we toggle the completed, we will need to do the same thing. We could add the same line of code here and here, but then this is going to cause repetition of code. And then when the application grows, maybe we're going to have more things that we'll be able to update. So it's not a good idea to repeat these lines of code here. The easiest and safest way to do what we want to do is use a built-in function from Pinia. So let's go back to the documentation. Let's go to state, and then we can scroll down to subscribing to the state. Let's go a bit more, replacing the state, subscribing to the state. So as you can see, we can set a function that will fire every time there is a change in the state. And this is exactly what we want, because then when we add a new task, this is going to be fired. When we do any update in the tasks, this is going to be fired as well. So this is perfect for what we need. So let's copy this whole piece of code. Let's go back there, and in the app.view, right after creating the store, let's subscribe to the store. So in this case, we need to use store.subscribe. So here it is just giving us some examples of things we can access about the change that has been done from the state. We don't need to use any of these now. Now, every time there is a change in the state, what we are going to do is send it to the local storage. So we can keep this line of code, local storage.set item. Let's just change it. Let's change this to tasks. And in this case, we don't have to keep the whole state. We can just send the tasks. Let's save this. Let's go back there. Reloading the application, let me just open the inspector. Let's go to application, local storage, and then the address for the local server. As you can see, we have nothing here, but when we do any change to the state, for example, just by clicking the add task, we are already creating this object. This is not ideal, but this process is not costly, so there isn't any problem in doing this. So now when we add a new task, so let me just open one as an example. When we click add task, this generated an update in the state. So we updated the local storage as well. So as you can see, we have this task right here. And if we do any change, at this moment, we can see that the completed is set to false. If we change the completed to true, then this object is updated. And now we can see it being updated in the local storage, which is really good. Now, all we have to do is every time we load the application, we are going to load the tasks from the local storage. Now, one thing that we need to adjust here, as you can see, our functionality for the ID is not working. This is because we already had tasks previously, but now that we didn't have any, that function didn't work. So we need to do a slight change there. So let's do this now. So what we can do is the following. If we have tasks, so if tasks.length, then we are going to do what we had. If not, we are just going to set the ID as 1. So this way, if we don't have any tasks in the array, we are going to start with ID 1. Let's save this. Let's see if this is working now. Let me just delete this. So reloading the application, let's add a new task. We add a task and let's check the ID. So now the ID is 1. We can add another one. Add task. And now we can see that the function for the ID is working normally. So now that this part is done, now that we are sending the tasks list to the local storage whenever we update something, we just have to load the tasks from the local storage when we load the application. So let's go back there. Now there is a super simple way to do this. Let's go up. Let's open the tasks array. I'm going to delete all this because we're not going to need it anymore. I'm just going to leave this empty array. And when we create this reactive variable, what we can do here is the following. If we have something in the local storage, so we can write local storage dot get item. So let's try to get the item with the ID of tasks. And of course, we need to do a JSON.parse because it is stored as a string in the local storage. So this way, we're going to bring this as an object. So if we find this, we're going to bring this. If not, we're going to start as an empty array. And we can do this with the OR operator. So the way the OR operator works in an expression like this is the following. It's going to start evaluating values from left to right. If it finds a true value, it is going to return the first true value. If not, it is going to return the last value of the expression. So in this case, if this is true, which means we have something inside this object, then we're going to return it. If this is false, both of them will be false and JavaScript will return the second one. So this is a wise way of using the OR operator. So let's see if this is working. Let's save this. Let's go back there. And now we have the local storage with these two tasks. And if we refresh the page, as you can see, we are now having these tasks persistent. So we have successfully created our own tasks manager that we can use in our computer. So now I can just go here. I can delete everything. I'm going to close this now, refresh the page. And now I can just start adding real tasks that I have to do in my day. For example, I need to go buy some groceries. I need to buy apples, rice, and juice. I can add the task. I also need to create a lesson about view router. And this could be my actual task manager. As soon as I'm done, I'm just going to click done, done. And if we refresh the page, we will see that they persist. Even if we copy the address, open a new tab, we can load this. And as you can see, the tasks are persistent. So that was it. Thank you so much for watching. We covered a lot of ground today, and I hope you were able to follow through smoothly. If you like my style of teaching, remember that I have a complete front-end web development course with the 10 essential technologies you need to know to become a web developer. I'm leaving the link with the promotional discount in the description of this video. So that was all. Please support this channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. I'm Ivan Gomez, and I will see you next time.